Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome here at our workshop called You Can't Patent Software, or Can You? My name is Kay Felder, and I am your moderator today. I work at the FFG Austrian Research Promotion Agency as a program manager to the NCPIP program, a program set in place by 3 Austrian ministries to professionalize knowledge transfer in Austria. Today, we are very glad to be hosting the session together with our partners, the AWS, the Austrian Promotional Bank, as well as the IPR Help Desk, a first-line IP service providing free of charge support to help European SMEs to manage their IP. I'm also happy to introduce my colleague at the FFG and co-host today, Alexander Käfer, who will be in charge of Slido. The topic of today are patents, and in this workshop, you will get tailored IP advice to help you devise a commercialization strategy. The focus of the workshop will be on startups and SMEs in the field of software. And you will also find out more about the European IP Help Desk and support measures offered in Austria, like the NCPIP project. As I've already mentioned, Alexander will be in charge of Slido, and we kindly ask you that during the presentation, you start asking your questions via the Slido tool, which you find on the right-hand side of your browser window. And now let's start the session with this great panel of esteemed experts we are very glad to have here today. So we are very happy to start our session with our first speaker. A warm welcome to Udo Gennari. Udo Gennari is an IP expert at Business Upper Austria and will talk about the IP Help Desk and support services for SMEs all around Europe and beyond. So please, Udo Gennari, we are excited to learn more about this, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kay, for the nice introduction. And I would like to jump in with my presentation. So the first topic of today, which I'm proud to introduce to you, is the Europe. Sorry, I hear another voice.
I don't hear it. I think maybe it's just on your end.
I have a totally other voice from another.
Okay, a technical glitch is occurring. I think, at least on my end, I can't hear this other voice. Is it fading?
Hear it neither.
Okay, let me just check out and.
Do you have any apps on your browser maybe that could cause this? Okay. Okay, I think then we will just take a few minutes until this problem is sorted out with the voices coming in from another browser probably, or from another stream. So in the meantime, I guess we can just wait, and we hope you're maybe if you want to, you can just use this to grab a quick coffee or to stretch yourself if you've been on the stream for quite some time and maybe need a quick relaxing relaxing break. But maybe if this takes a few minutes, maybe we can just use this really as a break and put in a slide with a technical break, if that's possible. Okay, so we are back, and due to some persisting technical difficulties, we are now switching up our agenda. And so we will now start with our keynote by Robert Harrison. Robert Harrison is a European patent attorney at the IPR helpdesk expert. And today he will talk about what needs to be considered with property rights in digital transformation and digital technologies, as well about the question if software, apps, algorithm, or artificial intelligence can be patented, and if so, what are the pitfalls? So this sounds very exciting, and we are very much looking forward to hear more about this. And so please, Robert Harrison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Could somebody just indicate that they can hear me okay?
I can.
Thank you very much indeed for doing that. And thank you very much indeed, Kay, for introducing me for this session today in the context of the B2B Software Days. Obviously, we'd like to be in Vienna today, but we're mostly doing this online. So it's been a real pleasure. I've been having some talks to a number of people over the past couple of days, talking about intellectual property, how it works within the digital environment, can patents be filed for software innovations or not? And I hope that during the course of this next 3/4 of an hour, you'll get a little bit of feeling to understand what is going on, how you can do it, and where we will be going. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the support of the European IPR Help Desk in preparing this presentation. Udo, I hope, will solve his technical problems before we finish today so that he can introduce the IPR Help Desk properly to you. But the web address is up there, and you are certainly welcome to contact Udo and his colleagues if you have any questions about intellectual property. But maybe just a little bit about myself. I'm actually originally from the United Kingdom. I now live in spend part of my time in Munich and part of my time in Vienna. I've actually got German citizenship as well. Brexit has given me German citizenship. I'm fortunate enough to be married to a German, so I'm allowed to keep both my German and UK citizens. I've got a physics degree. I worked for IBM Germany for a number of years, working on the front line of intellectual property with one of the world's great software companies. And a lot of what you'll hear today will be experiences that I've got from IBM, but also experiences with working with small and medium-sized enterprises throughout the past few years. Currently, I'm a founding partner of Sonneberg Harrison. I'm a member of several advisory boards. I work as a freelance consultant to the European IPR Help Desk, as Kay has actually mentioned to you. And so I'd be delighted if you've got any questions. Feel free to put them in the questions. I do speak fluent German, but we're speaking in English today. So if you want to express anything in German, feel free to do that without any problem at all. So where are we today? B2B Software Days. We're all about the digital environment. And what we know is that the new European Commissioner, led by President von der Leyen, has actually established that they really want Europe to be a global digital player, not just following behind companies out of the United States or out of China. Europe should be a leading player in artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things, database technology. You can go on this complete list of examples, and that's where the Commissioner really wants to invest a lot of funds and efforts. But it's not just investing in funds in the research and development. The Commission is also very, very concerned that we start thinking about what is intellectual property generated from the innovations that come out of Europe. And the Commission there's going to be a new IPR, Intellectual Property Action Plan, coming into play. We're going to be talking a couple of times throughout the course of this keynote presentation about what the Commission wants to do, and they're really looking for input from everybody, particularly from the SMEs, about how we can develop Europeans' digital strategy, how we can work on the intellectual property environment to make certain that Europe lives up to its world-class research and expertise. And let's just take a little look over the pond, over the Atlantic, to what the United States National Security Commissioner on Artificial Intelligence said in a report that was published just 1 month ago. And it said, in the context of the United States, the US must recognize intellectual property policy as a national security policy, critical for preserving America's leadership in AI and emerging technologies. I have to emphasize this is a US government report, so it's obvious that they're going to be thinking about America's lead. But there's a second sentence in there. This is especially important in light of China's efforts to leverage and exploit intellectual property policies. And as some of you will know, anybody who's studied what's going on in China will know this immense pressure from the Chinese government to actually file for intellectual property rights. Just to take an example from the field of artificial intelligence, this is the number of patents that have actually been increased filed up to 2017. I haven't actually got the latest data on here. This came from a publication from the World Intellectual Property Organization that was published a year and a half ago. There's going to be some new data, I'm sure, coming out soon. And anyone who thinks that the pandemic has actually decreased the number of patent applications coming, well, I'm afraid that's not correct. What we've seen is WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and the European Patent Office have had a massive increase in the number of patents in the class G06F, everything related to computer software in the past year. And that curve is just going to continue going up and up and up in the next few years. So this brings us to the question, how can we protect digital innovations? Is it just patents or is it other things? Well, it's all a different mixture. We're going to be focusing a lot on patents during the course of this presentation, but I also want to talk about data ownership, who actually owns the data that's out there. We're going to be talking about database rights, contractual rights, as well as coming on to patents. But let's first deal with the question of data rights and data ownership, because that's one of the most important components of the fourth industrial revolution. We're talking all the time about how data has become the new currency, but it's not like euros and cents. It's not like dollars and cents. It's all about this intangible, this virtual stuff that's out there. And there's a real question about whether we can really talk about ownership of data, because every single European country has a different concept, what it means by owning data. Do I own the data, my personal data, the fact I'm called Robert John Harrison, the fact that I was born on a certain date in London, UK, does that belong to me, or does that belong to the government because my parents went to the registry office when I was born? And what about my medical data? Who does that belong? Does that belong to my doctor, or does that belong to me? Can the doctor pass that to one of the health companies? Well, they have to if they want to get reimbursement. Or if you're living in the United Kingdom, this massive treasure trove of medical data has already been sold by the National Health Service to a number of companies to be able to process. But no one's really thought about who actually owns it. And every single attempt to try and define it has been problematic. The Commission is just about to propose a Data Governance Act, which is actually going to help us a lot more in actually understanding what data means, how it should be governed. For those of you who are working in Horizon Europe or Horizon 2020 projects, you'll know the pressure to open source your data, to make it available for everybody to use. And for those of you who are working in public authorities, will also know of your obligations. We want to make this data available so that small, medium enterprises and larger companies as well can actually come up with innovative ideas in order to improve Europe's capabilities. But if we leave aside data, one of the things we often think about when we are talking about protecting digital innovations is the field of copyright. We know that copyright computer programs are protected by copyright protection. That's been very, very clear in Europe since the early 1990s, even before Austria joined the European Union. there was a new law that came out from the European Commission in Brussels, which quite clearly stated that computer programs were protected by copyright. And worldwide, there's something down there called the Berne Convention, which means that any computer program, any piece of music, any audio book, any digital book that I produce, any PDF that I do, or newspaper that I publish on the internet, or my data, collections of data to a certain extent, that is all going to be protected under the software, the Berne Convention. We'll come a little bit more to data in a moment. But that was an important decision because it wasn't actually clear until the 1990s whether that was. We don't in Europe have any formal registration procedures for software. There's some voluntary procedures in some countries, but not in other countries. There's no need to actually register your software. There is the possibility in the United States or in China, and something you might want to think about if you're going to be active in those two countries. Software copyright is established the moment that your programmers write that code. And because as long as they're your employees, the European laws, as adopted by Austria, Germany, France, everywhere within the European Union, as well, by the way, as Switzerland, Norway, and the United Kingdom, that means that your employees transfer automatically the rights to their software to their employer. Slightly different for consultants, that's a slightly different way of doing it, but it doesn't really matter in many cases. What we are saying here is that copyright exists in all of your programs, in your graphic user interfaces, and you don't have to worry about it at all. The same thing happens with database rights. This is a really special European concept that was, again, developed in the 1990s. And the whole idea was to say, let's protect these databases. Some of the most important cases that have actually gone to court on that relate to football scores. Who owns the data about the Bundesliga in Germany? Who owns the data about the Premier League in the United Kingdom, this collection of data? Or if you're a betting person who likes betting on horses or on dogs, who actually owns the data there? That was supposed to protect it. It hasn't been particularly successful because what it really only protects is this collection of data. There are other cases where it has been successful, medical data, some of the data that's collected about diseases, about properties of diseases, put into these medical databases, that's been protected. What it doesn't protect is the individual data items, but it does require a significant investment and it protects the collection of data. There's a real problem, however, with artificial intelligence data collected by sensors, for example, from industrial plants. You're not just collating all of this data together. You're not just bringing in different sources. This is data that you have often developed yourself. And there's a real question whether that is really protected under database rights. And that, again, is a question that the European Commission really wants to try and investigate in the next few years to understand, could we protect this data better? Because what we know is that if you're developing an artificial intelligence system, if you've taken a database and you use this data to what we call to train the system, and you then sell the system on. This could be a system, for example, to do automatic diagnosis of diseases. This could be a system, for example, to actually develop or to identify when faults are going to happen in your chemical processing plant. This could be a system, for example, that will tell you when your car is developing faults. And the car companies have got all of sensor data. The manufacturing plants, such as BASF or Bayer, have got all of this data and are looking to use it to identify when their plants might fail, when they need to replace things, preemptive maintenance using the systems. A massively valuable resource, but it's not protected. It could easily be going. We have to actually think about putting special protection mechanisms in place to make certain that nobody steals that data. Now, for something like an industrial plant, that's not going to be really important. But you could certainly think about how valuable medical diagnostic data is going to be in the future. You can certainly think about how important it is going to be to make certain that data related, for example, to COVID, to Corona. Yes, if it comes from a public research project, it becomes publicly available out there. But if you yourself are using that publicly available data and processing it, curating it to develop new treatments, to develop new diagnostic devices, you've got an interest in at least keeping your processed, your curated data at least confidential so that you can recoup your investment on this. So one of the ways we often do this is contractual arrangements. We have all done it ourselves. We've all accessed data. Some of you will know, and Udo may talk about it later, the European Patent Office's SBUS database, where we use this data to find out what patents have been filed, or we use this data to see where our competitors are working. When we actually access that data, at some stage you will agree to the terms and conditions of use, which will say this is what you can use the data for, this is how you can curate it, this is how you can process the data, this is how you can exploit it, and this is how you can exploit rights. And so that is quite very, very important, that when you are exploiting your innovations in the digital space, that you actually get your contracts certainly signed up properly. And yes, I know how difficult how annoying it is when we go to a new website, when we have to sign that we agree with the terms and conditions. But for the owners of the website, the owners of the copyright on that website, the owners of the data on that website, it's important they know that you've agreed to these terms because they want to preserve their rights, their investment. But of course, one of the strongest ways of protecting one's investment, it's all about patent rights. And I know some of you are certainly going to say, but I've heard that patents cannot be protected by software. Where does that fit into it? Why do we have copyright if that protects the software? What do patents bring to us additionally? Well, the answer is quite a lot. If I write a computer program, for example, to carry out a diagnosis on somebody who's suffering, for example, got a temperature and certain other symptoms, and basically I say I have a temperature sensor that's measuring the temperature, thermometer, and then maybe I'm measuring some of these breath or her breath coming out, the gas, the components in there. And I write a computer program, I've got sensors out there, and I take this data in and then put it into a great large store. The data is there. That's all protected by copyright. But what it does mean is that somebody else can come along and rewrite that program. Instead of, like, for example, writing it in Python, they might write it in Java, or they might write it in C, or something like that. And that would not be an infringement of my copyright. My copyright only protects copying against the program. But if I've come across some really innovative ways of using that data, protecting it, if I've come across ways of actually creating a diagnosis based on that data, then I might want to get a more broader protection. And that's exactly where patents come into play. Protecting not just the expression, not of the idea, not just the computer program, but protecting the innovative, the inventive concepts behind that computer program. So what does this mean? How do we actually get there? Where do we go from here? Well, many of you will probably have filed a computer program. You're going to hear later from Thomas Planck, who's filed a patent application, beg your pardon, who filed a patent application, I think initially in Austria, then has gone into the international phase. This is what we call this PCT, the Patent Cooperation Treaty. And then after going from the international phase, we have to make a selection of countries where we want to go to. United States, do we want to go? Do we want to go to Europe? Do we want to just go to Austria or Germany? Do we want to go to China, Japan, Korea? The problem that we have at the end of the day is that each of these different national countries have different ways of doing it. Patents at the end of the day are national rights. Okay, the European patent is good for all of the European Union, also for Switzerland, also for Norway. And by the way, Brexit has not affected European patents at all. Any European patent can still be filed for the United Kingdom. Slightly different with trademarks, but at least with patents, the UK is still done. And what we know is that different countries have treated digital innovations differently. We have in Europe, as I say down at the bottom point, we say that software is excluded from patent protection per se. We cannot file computer programs as patents. Or in the United States, where they reject what they call abstract ideas. You can't file abstract ideas. And what's an abstract idea? A computer program, is that an abstract idea or not? Lots and lots of arguments about that. On the other hand, if you go to a country like Singapore, they're really pleased to have patents. Singapore is presenting itself as being a financial technology center. They will allow you to file patents on fintech applications, which would get rejected in Europe. And indeed, we've also filed for some German clients patents in Singapore, first applications in Singapore, because the Singapore IP Singapore has said are interested in those patents. Whereas in Europe, in Germany, in Austria, in the United Kingdom, we know that those patents would be rejected because they're considered to be business methods which would be rejected. So where do we go there? I'm just going to really focus on Europe for today. I know that some of the people listening in here will not be from Europe, but the majority of the participants are actually from Europe. So just excuse me for the moment that I really focus on what we call in Europe the two-hurdle test. What does that actually mean? The two-hurdle test. If I want to get a patent on a computer implemented invention or a software patent, I need to get over what the European Patent Office calls the two-hurdle test. And this test has been developed over the past few years. You won't find it in the European Patent Convention, the Book of Laws, nice blue book it used to be. These days it's a nice HTML website or a PDF file. You won't find this mentioned at all. This is what we call case law. It's been developed over the past years. And in fact, this year, there was a fundamental decision based on simulation of traffic flows in which the enlarged Board of Appeal, the top court in the European Patent Office, actually affirmed that this is the right way to approach software implemented inventions in Europe. So what does it mean? We have two hurdles. The first hurdle says you have to have a technical means. Now, that seems to be quite easy. Normally, you have to say you have a computer, and that's often just enough to get over this first hurdle. I know that sounds stupid. Why on earth should you do it? But what the Patent Office says is that they want to make it quite clear that you can at least get over this first hurdle by making it really clear in your patent application that you are using a computer and how you are using a computer. And you may say, well, that is just so obvious. But if you look at some of the patents that were filed 10, 15 years ago, obviously using computers, they didn't even mention something like that. They were just so abstract. They were just so nebulous. We just didn't really understand how they were actually being implemented. And it's really, really important that your patent application describes how you implement what you're going to do. And that goes down to actually even going as far, if necessary, describing the computer language, describing the source of your data, describing how you train the system. So the Patent Office says if you've got no technical features in there at all in your patent application, and later in what we call the patent claim, won't go into that today in much detail. We don't really have time, but as long as you've written it into your patent application, then that gets over the first hurdle. And that is so important because I hear very, very often inventors, programmers who are saying, but we're just using a normal computer. Why do we have to tell the patent office we're using this normal computer? Why do we have to tell them that we're compiling everything in Python? Why do we have to tell them we're using mathematical application? Why do we have to do this? Well, it's required because patents are only granted for technical innovations. And that can be a technical application. That can be a technical implementation. But just try and describe it in the patent application. So there's some really nice examples given. There's what we call the guidelines to the European Patent Convention, which you can actually access on the internet. And there is a link in my slides, anyone who gets the slides later on, to where you'll find it. And I know if you're not a lawyer, it can be a little bit challenging to read what some of this is going on. But have a look at it because it does say what can be patented. And it tells us quite clearly that the use of software and monitoring equipment, such as a heart monitoring device for identifying irregular heartbeats, or even my Apple Watch here for actually looking at my heartbeat, that can be patented. Or if I want to control, for example, an X-ray device, one of the earliest decisions from the European Patent Office on an X-ray device, controlling it, that was seen to be patentable. And of course, I guess all of us have got a mobile telephone these days. How does this telephone work with your Samsung? This is an iPhone, by the way, for those of you who can see it. Quite simply, because there are patents on the protocols communicating backwards and forwards on that telephone with other people. And those are some of the most important patents that have actually been filed. And in fact, much of the original telecommunications patents were filed by companies such as Philips, Ericsson, Nokia, even Siemens, and Alcatel, because they were the keys to creating our modern telephone system in order to do that. And even today, these patents are playing a really important role. There's massive court cases going on in Düsseldorf, Mannheim, and in Munich about that, where various companies are suing each other to get a proportion of patent licensing fees. And we're talking about significant sums of money. Just look up Nokia against Daimler in Google when you have time, and just look at how much each side is doing. Some of us will have heard about Samsung against Apple, where we were talking about sums of $1 billion US, $1 million US being exchanged because of license fees, just to show you how valuable software patents have become. And all of these protocols have actually been implemented on using computers. You couldn't do it with just by hardware alone. So we talked about separation sources and speech signals, the fact that we are having this Zoom call, that when people ask questions, you will be able to hear it quite well. Some of you may remember the original Skype systems where there was quite a lot of overlap between the two of it. But I think we've all become used to Zoom or Microsoft Teams or WebEx in order that we know that the quality of the sound has become really good. And I've already talked about providing a medical diagnosis. So that's the technical application. But we even know that the technical implementation of the system can be really good. There was a webinar from the European Patent Office a couple of weeks ago where one of the examiners ran through some examples of patents that had been granted or could be granted by the European Patent Office. And one of the examples he used, which I thought was a very interesting one, was the concept of moving data around different memory elements very, very efficiently so that you were actually able to access the data that you wanted quickly as possible. And yes, many of us will know the traditional cache memory, incidentally patented by IBM and Siemens in various forms. Many of us will remember that and will know how important that has been for speeding up computers in the 1990s. But even today, there are even much more complicated algorithms which can say, okay, we will put this into quick access data. We will store this where it is going to take longer to access. And the examiner himself said this was the interaction between the hardware elements and the data, the computer, that made it really, really important. Data collection, all of that data coming from sensors. How do we actually manage that sheer volume of data that's coming in? That is so important. And there are lots and lots of patents about that, on how to manage that collection data, how to operate the hardware elements properly. So we've got our first hurdle. What's our second hurdle for the 2-hurdle test? Well, this all comes down to the question of inventive step. What do we mean by inventive step? What do you mean? You can get a patent that is granted for something which is novel and inventive. It can't be just so obvious that the skilled person can come up with that idea. If I had never invented a pencil, for example, I can't file a patent on a pen. It's just so obvious to do something like that. And this is exactly what the Patent Office has now said to us, at least the European Patent Office. It has told us that if you want to get a patent on a computer-implemented innovation, you have to explain to the Patent Office what you are doing differently and why you're doing differently. And these differences have to be technical features. What does that mean to us? What do we mean by technical features? So I'll give you an example which was not seen to be a technical feature. And that was all about auctions. Some of you may know what a Dutch auction is, but just leave that aside. Basically, an auction is people offer a price, and at some stage, a price is established for goods. And we all know the traditional auction. You bid, so the auctioneer says, who wants to pay me $10 for this pen? For example, somebody says 20, 30, 40. How do you computerize that? Well, it's fairly simple to computerize. Suppose I was the first person to computerize that. Let's just suppose for a moment. Would that be granted as a patent? Well, the answer is no, it wouldn't be granted as a patent. Why? Because you would be using a standard computer, and the novelty or the inventive step would only be in how to run this auction, which is probably already known. There was no additional technical features, and therefore the patent would be refused. And there's a Dutch auction patent that was refused. Or, for example, I want to detect fraud in credit cards. How do I detect fraud in credit cards? Won't be granted, at least in Europe. Or a more interesting one was a new type of insurance policy. It was granted in the United States, but was actually refused in Europe. And let's think about the Amazon one-click. You know, we want to purchase something from Amazon, we just need to click once. Was that granted? In the United States, it was granted. In Europe, well, that was a long discussion that was going on. Why? Because it wasn't just about the one click. What Amazon did is that they put cookies onto your browser. And therefore, one of the questions became was that sufficiently technical to be able to grant a patent on or not? And then the next question is, if I've identified the technical feature, how would it be obvious for somebody to do it? We come, of course, then to the question of whether we know whether that Amazon one-click, putting the cookie on it, that may be a technical feature. That's definitely a technical feature, enabled you to purchase your book much, much more quickly than you had done in the past. You didn't have to type all of your data into the computer again. But is that really novel? Is that really inventive? We know that cookies, we put cookies on there. We knew we could insert people's identification on there. Probably not. In America, it was seen to be sufficiently novel, inventive. But in Europe, there were lots of discussions on that. Or, for example, and this is where we start coming into some of the interesting stuff these days, what about data that you've downloaded. For example, you've collected a lot of data on breast implants. One of the real challenges in breast implants is actually to identify the right type of tissue for people to actually recreate breasts. As some of us know, many of us will have friends who've suffered from cancer and will know that they've had breast reconstruction survey, and that's taken out of certain types of tissue that comes out of your body. So how do you identify that? How can you get an X-ray there? And we've learned earlier on today that an X-ray control system can be patented. But what about this idea these days of actually using those X-rays to identify the right type of tissue for surgery? Is that novel? Is that inventive? Well, I can tell you the answer is yes, because a patent, exactly that patent that came from a Portuguese research organization, was granted a few months ago. I know because I wrote the patent and we got it through the patent office, and we were able to explain to the patent office that this was a really, really important invention. Nobody had come up with this idea before. Nobody had identified this particular use of the X-rays in order to identify the right type of tissue. And the patent office had no problems with the fact that the concept, the major novel concept behind it, was actually based upon the idea that you were using a standard computer, specially written computer program, but more importantly, we'd identified that we could use the X-rays to really identify the right type of tissue here. So we had the problem, which was identify the right type of tissue. We had the solution, which we explained from these X-rays. There was never a question about whether that was going to be a good invention or not, because it was solving a technical problem using technical means. The skilled person could possibly have arrived at the idea, but would they have done it? The conclusion, no, is they wouldn't. And that's a really important point that's sometimes overlooked. To get this two-hurdle approach through the patent office, to really understand the technical computer that you're using to get over the first hurdle, to really explain how you create the solution, the technical features, thinking about it, how you're going to do it, is really important. And if you get it right in Europe, experience shows that this works in many other countries in the world. And there's a recent case in the United States, I think it was Philips that was behind it, where the patent office or the examiner actually, or I think it was the Board of Appeals in America, actually praised the person who wrote the patent, because the author of the patent had actually clearly explained the technical problem that needed to be solved, had clearly explained the technical solution that was implemented to get where we are. But of course, this then brings us to an interesting question. Can a computer itself be an inventor? And some of you may have heard about Davis. Davis is a patent application that has gone through, well, the European Patent Office, the US Patent Office now, the British Patent Office, IP Australia, all of whom have said no. An inventor has to be a real computer, a real inventor. It cannot just be a computer program. It's not possible for a computer program to be an inventor. That's not what we mean by an inventor. And again, there's a really interesting paper that has just come out on that by the European Commission, thinking, well, how do we deal with this sort of thing? Because if you can't, how does somebody come up with an idea, a new concept, and it's a computer that does it? Is that possible? The AI enthusiasts will talk about singularity. We'll talk about the idea that somehow computers acquire the facility to be able to think, to generate new ideas. In practice, however, as far as I've seen, everything that I've seen now, it's been all about a human creating the data set, instructing the computer how the computer should actually function, and then to generate the invention. In other words, there's been to date almost always a real intervention from a human person, which we need to take into account. But it's actually a very old problem. If you look at the notes later on, I'll give you a reference to an old computer program, an old patent that was filed actually back in the 80s, which talked about this issue about it. So I'm slowly coming to an end to my presentation today, and I hope I've been able to give you a little bit of an insight into how we can actually protect in the digital innovations using the various intellectual property rights, the intellectual property patents and copyrights and database rights, but also thinking a little bit about how to get the contracts in place. How do you make certain that your clients, your customers, the people that are using your solution are going to be working on? But just one very last subject that I'm going to bring up for today, which is the whole question about blockchain innovations. As we know, these are often being used for financial products these days. Can they be protected by inventions, by patents? That is a really, really interesting question that we have here. And I don't entirely know how that's going to develop. What we do know that for for financial and business services, it's almost certain that the Patent Office, at least in Europe and the United States, will reject those patents. They'll say that the features are not technical. They'll say that they're not inventive because you have nothing novel in there to describe the features. But once we get into engineering solutions or cybersecurity or operation of computers, then we might start being able to have some inventiveness out there. And there's a number of patent applications going through the Patent Office in which exactly those issues are being discussed by the Patent Office. So let's just sum up with my last but one slide. Let's just understand where we are today, where we're going to be able to go in the future. Keep on thinking about what the European Commission is doing about this. Just go back to Europe's digital strategy. Just let's remember the words of President von der Leyen when she said that she wants to see Europe being one of the global leaders in the digital innovation space. We know that data can be protected. We know that copyright is going to be we know that copyright can be used for computer programs. We don't have to worry about novelty, inventive step, creativity. It's already there. That's where we are actually at. But what I have tried to tell you is that patenting is possible under certain circumstances. You'll need to think about it. And we're going to see from Thomas Planck in a moment about how his organization actually sat down with the IP advisors and created a patent application that has gone through the Patent Office or is going through the Patent Office. Because it's not true what you see in many blogs. Patent protection is possible for digital innovation. Think about where to go, how to do it, understand what you're doing, how you're doing something novel and inventive. And the chances are that you should be able to get patents in addition to your copyright invention. So I'd like to thank people very much for help in doing this. Udo has given me some valuable input over the years. European IPR Help Desk has helped sponsored part of the preparation of this presentation. And I hope that Udo is now available in order to explain the services of the IPR Help Desk. So I'd like to pass back to Kay. Thank you very much indeed, Kay, and it's been a great pleasure. I understand my presentation will be available later on today or through the website. So do feel free to get a copy of it. And there's some contact details from me for anybody who has further questions or wants to follow up, or accept me or invite me to a meeting on the matchmaking website. I've still got a few meeting slots available tomorrow afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Robert Harrison, for jumping in and starting with your keynote. This was really exciting and some very, very interesting examples. So, and now please welcome back Udo Gennari and his presentation about the IPR Help Desk support services. And we hope all is well now on your end with the audio.
Thanks, yeah.
Okay,
I'm in with the audio and soon also with the screen. So thanks a lot. And let's...
Great, thanks. Then the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. So is it now visible? Okay. Yes. Fine. So as Robert already shortly introduced, I'm also as ambassador of the European IP Help Desk, supporting such IP events as today. And I also had the pleasure to have him in Linz 1.5 years ago. And so I was not really surprised that, again, he gave an excellent presentation with updates of in the meantime. So my topic today is, on the one hand, to introduce the European IP Help Desk, and on the other hand, to give just some examples of IP for digitization from a recent project we had. European IP Help Desk. I have also other links included, and later on, if you distribute the PDF, they can be used. So the services of the European IP Help Desk are summarized here. First of all, the remark, it's a service initiative of the European Commission, which has been prolonged several times already and is very helpful, especially for SMEs, or it is directed to beneficiaries of EU-funded projects, to researchers, and also to SMEs. It gives a lot of free of charge support services, like, for instance, first line advice, a helpline, which I come to later. And let's start here. So there are trainings offered online nowadays very often, but also support of on-site sessions like we have it today, or at least also online, but from some member state. There is a website with frequent updates, the helpline, as I mentioned. There are a lot of very relevant publications which are updated all the time and also translated into the main European languages, so that all can understand it also in their language. And there is this ambassador scheme, which I shortly come to, and also a presence at IP conferences and other events. Robert, as he himself already mentioned, is one of these excellent experts which are asked frequently for such trainings. The helpline can be recommended because it offers free of charge support in topics like, for instance, if you want to check a non-disclosure agreement or something which you have got from a future partner and which you would like to check, or many other such items, you can ask them via phone, email, or also on the web, and you receive an answer within 3 working days, which is really a service that can be very well recommended. Clearly, it's also confidential, the whole thing. Then there is a lot of IP resources in the library, in the electronic library. So starting from fact sheets to IP guides, like, for instance, IP in Europe, or for instance, the way of how to apply for a European patent and then further on nationally. There are a lot of interesting case studies and, for instance, monthly bulletins. A very interesting topic are these free live streamings which are offered. Here are just the live streamings of May and June. And for instance, quite relevant for the audience could be this webinar on May 19th of IP management in ICT projects, among all the others which are offered here, or also on June 9th on the new copyright directive, because as Robert also has mentioned, copyright is also something which software industry has to consider a lot. Then, as already mentioned, there is this ambassador scheme. So we have currently 47 ambassadors from 28 European countries, which normally meet 2 times a year in person. Nowadays, also only online. But nevertheless, we get a lot of outstanding training possibilities from European Patent Office or from the European Union Intellectual Property Office. And I hope that we will meet again end of the year if the worst things are over. There is also this inventory of ambassadors. So you find it on these pages from every country, which most of the participants are from one of these countries, I suppose, and you can find your ambassadors in these countries. There has been some initiative of interviews, Ambassador of the Month interviews, and if anybody is interested, he or she can read mine here, or also on the web page of the others. This disclaimer, I don't want to go in detail, so I change now to the second and last topic of my talk, that I bring an example of an Interreg Central Europe project, which has been called InnoPeer AVM, like advanced manufacturing, and which addressed a lot of technical topics, but also IP in this regard. And that was my task, to check what conditions for IP do we have in advanced manufacturing. And there was also a report compiled and used also in a conference about IP aspects in the fourth industrial revolution and Internet of Things. But as this has been some 2 years ago, I updated it just last week with the latest report from the European Patent Office about patents and the fourth industrial revolution study. So the next figures are very actual recent ones, which show, for instance, that in the 5 main areas where such developments are taking place in the global innovation centers, you see that still United States has quite a significant lead in the number of patents, but Europe and Japan are roughly the same nowadays. China is very much catching up, and I would suppose if we would look at the data of 2020, for instance, that they probably have already overtaken Europe and Japan, being second then nowadays. Here is an interesting comparison of the top 10 applicants in the field of fourth industrial revolution patents. in the first decade of the new millennium and the second recent decade of the new millennium. And you see that, for instance, recently in the last decade, we had two Korean companies, number one and second. And we had here as a new player, Huawei, which has not been in the first 10 places the decade before, and only two European big companies and 4 US big companies. So that's and only one Japanese these days, whereas it have been 4 in the first 10 places the decade before. Just as some indication of where these patents are situated, I have found another report of the World Intellectual Property Office, patents in various IoT fields. And I don't want to go into details, but just it can be taken from this table that there is a mixture of hardware and software patents, but the software patents are nowadays gaining more and more importance. And some recent applications are also in transportations, home security, e-commerce, and for instance, healthcare. And just to mention it, now I'm also working in an EU project about digital healthcare. So this is something which is also very relevant these days. And now, as a kind of already introduction also to Thomas Planck, whom I had the pleasure to support a bit in IP topics. Tributech has granted Austrian patent and also a world patent application, or PCT application, as Robert has mentioned it. And I think by just mentioning now the title, I will then hand over to Thomas for his deeper insight. The title is Apparatus and Method for Checking the Integrity of Sensor Data Streams. So also in part a bit a mixture between hard and software, because you have an apparatus. But I'm sure that Thomas will go into more details about the general field of activities of Tributech. And with that, I may thank the audience for their attention and give back to Kay. Thank you.
Thank you, Udo Gennari. So this was a very interesting presentation also, and we are very glad that it now worked. And also thanks for already starting the introduction to our next speaker. So up next, we have Thomas Planck, CEO at Tributech Solutions, and he will give us an example from an Austrian SME that is turning data into facts and will address how they benefit from patents in devising their IPR strategy and what support they received from the IPR help desk. So we are very much looking forward to learn more about this. And please, Thomas Planck, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction and the possibility to speak today. I would like to shortly introduce what we do at Tributech and then highlight why the patent application is relevant for us, where it fits into our product strategy, and yeah, how we see it as an underlying foundation for our business model. I'll just share my slides. So I hope you can see them now.
Yes.
Sounds good. Perfect. So Tributech is a technology company. We're located in Linz and Innsbruck in Austria. Currently 17 people and are working on the topic of turning data into facts. Why is this relevant? There's some changing market environment since a few decades already. It's the increasing relevance of the data value itself and the relevance of ecosystems, especially data ecosystems. So when you see it, the recent publications from Gartner, also the the reports and news about the European data initiatives like Gaia-X, Catena-X, and others, you can see that there's a huge attention, especially in the German industry, on data sharing itself, working in data ecosystems, exchanging data along the value chain. For example, Munich Re bought Relayer, an IoT platform, a few years back, and now they are leveraging the potential of the data itself. They bought together with Relayer in a collaboration with the industry company Trumpf, where they offer now new business models like pay per part or equipment as a service.
Dear Thomas, sorry to interrupt you.
No problem at all.
We just realized that you're sharing your slides in the moderator view, and so the slides are very small.
Sorry. Better now?
Yeah, it's better now. Thank you.
Perfect. Sorry. So then I already spoiled my next slide. Now a little bit bigger. So with an increasing relevance of data for new business models, for internal decision making, for payments, for warranties, for example, there's also the risk of tampering data. So if you have a look at the impact that fake news had on social media, you can imagine what impact tampered IoT data might have on the B2B business world if, for example, sensor data gets manipulated or gets changed in a way that processes that are automatically started may then reduce quality, for example. So that's a big threat for the industry, that there are not big hacking attacks where for example, huge data storages are encrypted, but there are small changes in, for example, production data or quality decreases, and it's hard to find the reason for that. So data integrity verification will be a huge issue in the future. And that's the reason why we at Tributech focus on the aspect of selective data sharing in ecosystems and also providing the necessary trust from sensor to consumer. How are we doing that? We are offering a data asset management technology, empowering our customers to do exactly that, manage and trust data across systems and treat the data portfolio as real business assets. How do we interpret data as assets? That's also the reason where our patent come into play. So proof of data integrity and origin is key for us. In our opinion, data is nearly worthless if you can't provide proof that it hasn't been changed or manipulated by someone else. It's also the possibility to share or trade it or provide some change tracking along the data lifecycle. We provide this benefit and these aspects via our product. It's called Data Space Kit, and it consists of two parts. The one is the data space node. It's a platform as a service module and works as gateway for the data flow. So managing the data flow, managing the data subscriptions, handling your internal and external data streams. The interesting part of our product is the data space agent. It's integrated as close to the source as possible and contains our signing and hashing process that then can provide the proof of origin and integrity across systems borders. And this is based on our patent application, where we combine Merkle tree hashing technology, a distributed ledger technology, and also the signing and hashing process for sensor data streams. So this was one key aspect, combining these three components, that it proves the novelty of our patent application, and then was considered by the Austrian Patent Office, for being eligible for applying. So in the last few months, we decided to go for a PCT application as well, because the international markets are highly interesting for us. Are currently deciding in which countries we would like to follow on with the application. Maybe short notice why it is relevant and where is the hardware aspect coming into play. On the left side, you see the data space agent again and the integration in a device. So as mentioned before, it is necessary as close as possible to the source to provide the relevant, so the highest possible of security and trust. And this is also the link to the hardware aspects of our patent application. One example from a customer story. It's with Findustrial. It's a fintech platform from Austria, and they provide pay-per-use application, so pay-per-use calculations and a pay-per-use platform for the customers, and therefore it is necessary to trust the data from the operator, because payments and warranties and the whole contract is based on this trustworthy sensor data, and this is ensured by our data space agent across company borders. So for the operator, for the machine builder, for the banks, and also for the insurance companies, they all have a trustworthy foundation based on our agent, which is the product made out of our patent. We provide our technology as white-labeled integration, so we are addressing larger enterprises, device manufacturers, or industry automation companies, and therefore we are quite happy to have a strong IP as underlying foundation, which then enables us new licensing business models. So if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them in the Q&A session. And yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Thomas. This was another exciting talk. And before I introduce our last speaker, I also wanted to remind our audiences that they can send in their questions via the Slido tool for our great panelists, and that we will address them later, as you just mentioned. So please feel free to send in your questions to our experts. So, and now I'm happy to introduce our last speaker. So please welcome Gert Zechmeister, my colleague from the NCPIP, working at the Austrian Wirtschaftsservice aka Austria Promotional Bank AWS. And he will now talk about IP tools and templates for software SMEs based on the IP agreement guides at the NCPIP project. So we are looking forward to hear more about this. And please, Gert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Let me just share my screen. And okay, this is the wrong one, I think. No.
No, yes, you're still in the yeah, now it's working.
Now it should work. Okay,
yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kay. Yeah, as she already outlined, my name is Gert Zechmeister from the IPR department, Intellectual Property Rights Department from the Austria Wirtschaftsservice. And in my role as technical coordinator for one of the tools of NCPIP, I will shortly introduce you to what the NCPIP actually is, what the goals are, and then focusing on actually the tool I am technically hosting. NCPIP is the national contact point for intellectual property in Austria. It was set up in Austria based on the EU IP recommendation from 2010. It's the only country so far which has set up an NCPIP. The ABS is coordinating it actually, apart from together with the Austrian Research Promotion Agency, the FG, and we are backed actually by three federal ministries, and it consists actually of a set of IP tools knowledge and best practice examples in terms of intellectual property. What are the objectives, methods, and instruments which is behind NCP-IP? Generally, and this is actually my playground actually, is the Intellectual Property Agreement Guide. It's a website which consists or which provides legally sound and commented model contracts in the tech transfer area. Secondly, we have also launched an open innovation toolbox in order to provide information and methods for setting up in open innovation processes between partners. And apart from that, we deliver also, or we provide also IP knowledge, best practice examples, and the NCP-IP is also organizing events, providing publications, for example, on IP policy or strategy. Therefore, information resources you can also find on the website. Just a short view on the Open Innovation Toolbox. It was actually launched in 2019, and the goal is actually to provide methods, processes, procedures to set up an open innovation process based on fair use and for all the involved partners. That's how it actually looks like. So we have a website where you have nice icons, and behind that you can see how to create a workshop, what means crowdsourcing in the context of open innovation, and so on, lead users, makerspaces, and so on. I invite you to dig into this website, but still it's not the main focus on what I'm talking today. Actually, the main tool which I'm responsible for in technical regards is the IPAG, the Intellectual Property Agreement Guide. And as Robert Harrison already outlined, apart from patents or let's say copyrights, also, of course, in software development projects, it's very important to have an agreement, to have a contractual agreement, a binding agreement between the parties working or delivering software. And therefore, we have actually we set up the Intellectual Property Agreement Guide already in 2013. It was launched actually, and it's steadily growing with different contract templates from the tech transfer area. Initially, it was based from, it comes out from the university, from the universities in Austria, but together with public research institutions or corporates and SMEs, there is a range of templates available in the tech transfer area. To be more specific, we have research assignments or cooperation agreements. We have an agreement on what to include or what to consider in terms of spin-offs from universities. A set of confidentiality agreements, or NDAs or CDAs, as they are also called. Of course, it always also focuses on selling, purchasing IP. So we have agreements there. We have licensing agreements, which is very important when you are going to provide licenses to third parties. And we have also a strong biotech focus. So we have also material transfer agreements in terms of biotech projects. And last but not least, we also have by now actually two agreements regarding software development. And this is what I'm going to talk more in depth right now. I just give you a glimpse on what's important, but or what's actually included. But I will also give you a short overview what contract templates we have in terms of software development. So first, the general software. So I'm trying out the laser pointer. Let's see if this is working. Yeah, there it is. I guess you can all see it where I am now, what I'm talking about now. So first of all, it's about the development of software, and all of the agreements are available in German with legal comments, German without. So you have a clear mode file, and you have it also in English. This is very important because as we are basing all the agreements on Austrian federal or Austrian laws, but of course, partners are often in many projects international. That's why we provide an English version as well. The next one is actually a software evaluation license agreement. This was mainly actually asked for universities, because sometimes they just provide software to be evaluated by third parties, but not purchased or not obtained. So there was the need for a special agreement, which is just focusing on an evaluation phase. And last but not least, it's also categorized in the software agreements. We have a dispute resolution clause, which is, as far as I know, also partially included in the development contract. And I will actually dig a little bit deeper into the software IT research and development contracts. It's just about being two, or can also be, of course, more parties to set up a project to develop software. And this is how it looks like from the very start. So you have actually a file where you put in the data you need. In this example, for example, here the parties who are signing this contract. The main part of EPUC, and I think this is a USP, is actually kind of a guidance through the contracts. You have some color codes in the Word files. All the contracts are provided in Word files in the Word format. You have parts where you need further processing or references to other clauses within one project, or within one agreement, and the red color indicates you have to think about how to formulate this and how to be checked by the parties. The green and so actually I have some examples. This is, for example, the termination event. So here it refers within the document to another clause. The green and the blue part is actually gaps which has to be filled, or which, let's say, are clauses more in favor of the industry or the research partner. Of course, actually, just by the way, the templates can be used by research institutions for bilateral projects, as well as industry partners, but most of them are actually formulated as there is an industry partner and a research partner, but it has to be tailored, of course, especially to your needs. And the last actually is a guidance for input fields. So this is actually where you just have to enter names, departments, and so on. I just picked out some important clauses, or some clauses which I deem important in general in tech transfer agreements, but especially maybe in the software part. First of all, you should define which means change process actually should mean deliverable terminology, which can be clarified in the definition section. The subject matter, of course, is the most important. You should be clear what you are talking about, what has to be delivered. Is it delivered in several deliveries, in components? What's the background IP which you are bringing in, for example, and which has to be determined from the results. The intellectual property rights has to be, or how to handle it has to be agreed on as well, of course, which means the scope of rights, the usage of rights, who files, uses, license, IPR, and so on. The contract performance means conditions of delivery, quality assurance, and so on. Non-disclosure clauses should be found in all of the agreements which you can find on EPAC. Very important is how are let's say the scenarios when something is not delivered, or when there are some circumstances which are blocking a project. Then you should be aware how to prevent, how to mitigate these risks. Formal regulations, just the termination, expiry of contract, and so on. It's just a few points which I tried to outline. Just checking the time in between, but I think Kay will stop me right now if I'm exceeding my time of speaking. Just one thing from the annex, actually, it might be important in this case. This is actually the outlining the Agile software agreement approach. It's actually in German, but I think it's quite obvious. Sorry, touch the microphone. That we have a planning phase and development phase and a rollout phase. And as some of you, or I suppose many of you will know, the Agile approach, you have you have sprints, you have daily scrums, and actually, and this graphic, for example, can help to outline the approach, how you will, how the delivering party is delivering actually the software product.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have to wrap up your part. Sorry for interrupting.
I'm ready. That's it, actually.
You're ready. Okay,
contact.
Great.
As you see, Kay Felder is also the contact person from the FFG. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. And thanks everyone from our great panelists again for the great presentations. We are now at the end of our session, and as I told you at the beginning, we have now the possibility to that your questions that you put into the Slido are going to be asked to our experts. And Alexander, I give now to you. Do we have questions, and can you present them to our speakers?
Yes, thank you, Kay, and thank you to the speakers. And also thank you to the audience for asking questions. The first question is for Mr. Harrison, and it's from Mr. Sepp. I have a question. Is there any reliable way to protect the user interface of our software?
Yes, thanks very much indeed for that question. Yes, I didn't talk about it, but there is also something called design rights. In German, you would say Geschmacksmuster, nothing to do with recipes or anything, but it's all about design rights. And indeed, you can protect the user interfaces, what you see on the screen, using design rights. And again, there's a new discussion from the European Commission on that, with how we should update that. And actually, somebody with a similar name has already asked for a meeting with me on that, so I guess that they want to follow up that one up in person. But yes, to answer very quickly, there is a way of doing it.
Thank you very much. Next question for Mr. Gennari. Following the presentations, I got the impression Europe has the strictest requirements for patents. Is this correct?
I mean, the question could even be answered much better by Robert, but yes, it's true. You have less restrictions for software patents in the US, and especially there was a time when such one-click like Amazon was patented in the US. Nowadays, since 2013, they also have the America Invents Act, which, let's say, set up the hurdle a bit higher, but still there is the notion in the US that everything can be patented, what is useful, and Europe is a bit stricter on that.
Thank you. And the last question, are there any tips for future applicants for patents in Europe, Mr. Planck? concerning the process.
Could you please repeat the question? Had an audio issue.
Yes, of course.
Of
do you have any tip for future applicants for patents in Europe concerning the process?
Yes, definitely. So it's worth the money to go to a patent attorney and get help, because these if you read our patent in detail, it's a different language. So it's written in German or English, but it's a totally different language for normal entrepreneurs to really understand and formulate what you really would like to protect. So it's definitely worth the money. And in Austria, there's the possibility of the patent check. Once a year, you can apply for it, and then you get some grants covering parts of the costs. So this is definitely the best recommendation, because otherwise
80%, in fact,
yeah,
80% are funded, and there is only one hurdle, but this is very useful. The patent office makes a very thorough patent search, whether it's patentable or not, the invention idea. And if they consider it patentable, then you get afterwards the 80% funding of the whole rest. But also the patent office fees are also funded by 80%.
Thank you for your answers, and I will hand over to Kay.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. And so I think we are out of time. So I'm only left to say is thanks again, everyone, from our really great panel for this really interesting inputs, and also thanks to the audience for sending in their questions. So thanks to all of you. Thanks also, Alexander, for being my co-host today. And I wish you all a great rest of your day. And thank you for joining us. And see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Kay, and
Thank
all
you.
organizers.